The wind had changed that evening. It came down from the mesas like a whisper carrying dust, the smell of cedar, and something else, something uneasy. Evelyn Hart tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders as her horse, a gray Mustang she'd named Ash, crested the final ridge toward her homestead. The sun was lowering, red as blood, and her shadow stretched long over the barren ground. She'd been gone for 4 days riding east to Fort Delaney to trade hides and buy salt. 4 days wasn't much in the wilderness. But as her cabin came into view, her breath hitched in her throat. A fence now surrounded it, not a ranch fence built for cattle. Not hers. It was something different, tall, sturdy, made from stripped pine poles, lashed together with rawhide and decorated with hanging feathers and bones that clicked in the wind like hollow teeth. The fence wasn't there when she left, and no one, not a single soul for 30 miles, had reason to build it. Ash stopped snorting, uneasy. Evelyn's hand went instinctively to the Colt on her hip. The door to her cabin was shut, the windows dark. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. Someone or something was inside. For a long moment, she sat there on the saddle, letting the silence settle. Only the wind and the creak of the strange fence spoke. She'd lived alone since her husband died 2 winters ago, shot by raiders in a canyon she still couldn't bear to ride through. The land was rough and wild, but it had always been hers. Until now, she dismounted slowly, boots crunching on dry grass. A crow cawed overhead and flew across the crimson sky. Evelyn ran her gloved hand over one of the poles. It was freshly cut, the sap still sticky. There were markings burned into the wood circles with crossing lines, symbols she didn't recognize but that made her skin crawl. She circled the fence once, keeping her hand near her gun. Whoever built this had done it fast, efficiently. Every corner measured, every knot tight. She found a small break at the rear where a piece of hide hung like a warning banner. She stepped through. The cabin loomed quiet in the dying light. "Hello?" she called, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "This is my land." No answer. She stepped up to the porch. A single feather lay across the doorstep, black and red-tipped. It looked like it belonged to no bird she'd ever seen. She nudged it aside with her boot, then slowly opened the door. The inside was untouched, but not quite. Her table had been cleared, and her late husband's rifle was gone from above the hearth. In its place hung another feather, longer, darker, tied with sinew. On the table sat her old kettle, filled to the brim with water. And beside it, a single white stone, smooth as glass. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. It was warm. Then she heard it, the faint rhythm of a drum. Distant, coming from beyond the ridge behind the cabin. A heartbeat of the land. Evelyn backed toward the door, eyes darting around. The air outside had grown thicker, the sky dimmer. She saw movement beyond the fence-line, shadows slipping between the trees. Then a voice, deep and low, spoke in a language she didn't know. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She pulled her Colt free, keeping it aimed toward the sound. "Show yourself," she shouted. Nothing, only the creak of the wind. Then one figure appeared. He stood on the other side of the fence, tall and still, his skin painted in streaks of ash and red. Feathers braided into his long black hair caught the fading light. He carried no weapon she could see, only a staff carved with symbols. His eyes met hers through the gaps in the fence, dark, unwavering, ancient. He said something softly, almost like a prayer. Then he raised his hand, palm open, and placed it on one of the fence posts. Evelyn didn't move. "You've built your fence on my land," she said, trying to steady her breath. The man didn't answer. He turned his gaze toward the setting sun, murmured again, and then walked away into the gathering dusk. One by one, the shadows behind him faded too. Evelyn stood frozen for a long time, the weight of silence pressing down around her. Then she turned back toward her cabin and noticed something she hadn't before: her husband's old boots, covered in dust, sitting neatly by the door. They hadn't been there when she left. The fence surrounded her now like a circle she couldn't break, and deep in her chest, she felt it. Whatever had begun here wasn't just trespass. It was warning. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. The wind moaned through the cracks of the fence like a whispering ghost, and every creak of her cabin made her hand twitch toward the Colt lying on the table beside her. The feather hanging above the hearth swayed slightly, though no breeze touched it. Outside, the embers of her small fire flickered through the window, casting long, restless shadows on the walls. She'd faced storms, wolves, and men with bad intentions before. But this felt different. The silence beyond that fence wasn't emptiness. It was watching. By dawn, she'd made up her mind. Whoever the Apache man was, he'd built that fence for a reason, and she intended to find out what it was. After coffee and a few bites of hard biscuit, Evelyn slung her rifle over her shoulder and stepped outside. The cold bit her cheeks, but the morning sun glowed faintly on the horizon, cutting through the mist like a blade. The fence stood tall, unmoving, surrounding her land like a wooden fortress. In the daylight, she could see the detail she missed the night before: bones tied with red string, markings etched with charcoal, and strips of animal hide fluttering like warnings in a language older than the land itself. Evelyn moved to the break she'd used earlier and slipped through. Her boots crunched softly against the frost-hardened earth as she followed, faint tracks, barefoot impressions leading away toward the ridge. She followed them cautiously, rifle ready, the air thick with the smell of pine and earth. After half an hour, the sound of a drum rose again, soft but rhythmic, like a heartbeat carried through the hills. She crept closer, crouching behind a cluster of rocks. Below her, in a clearing, she saw them. Half a dozen Apache men sat in a circle around a small fire. The man she'd seen last night stood among them, shirtless in the cold, his skin painted in black streaks. He was larger than the others, his muscles cut and corded like iron under bronze skin. Around his neck hung a string of turquoise beads and a carved bone pendant. They weren't warriors preparing for battle. They were performing some kind of ritual. Smoke rose from the fire, curling around them as they chanted low, the rhythm matching the beating drum. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't know what they were doing, but instinct told her to leave. Then one of them turned his head sharply. His gaze locked on her hiding place. "Damn it," she whispered, rising to her feet. The men stopped chanting. Silence fell heavy as the mountain. The tall warrior stepped forward. He raised his hand not to attack, but to beckon her closer. Evelyn hesitated, then took a few steps down the slope, rifle still slung across her shoulder. "You fenced my cabin," she said when she was close enough. Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded. Why? The warrior's eyes studied her, deep and unflinching. His English came slowly but clear. "Not fence to trap. Fence to protect." She frowned. "Protect from what?" The man's gaze shifted toward the distant canyon. "Something walks in your valley. Old Fang. Not man, not beast." He tapped the pendant on his chest. "We mark land to hold it back." Evelyn stared at him, unsure if he was warning her or mocking her. "You expect me to believe that? That my land's cursed?" He didn't answer, only gestured toward the white stone she'd found on her table. "You keep it close." "It knows your name now? My name?" she asked, startled. "How could you?" The man's dark eyes flicked to her rifle. "Your husband buried wrong. The ground here not settled. Spirits angry. You alone now, yes?" Her breath hitched. She hadn't told anyone about her husband, not even the traders at the fort. "How do you know that?" The man stepped closer, and she could see faint scars across his chest, marks of battle and ritual. We hear his spirit cry. It call to us in wind. It not rest. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. A shiver crawled down her spine. That's nonsense, she finally said, though the words felt weak. The warrior's expression didn't change. You hear it too. At night, yes. Her lips parted. She remembered the whispering wind, the tapping at her window last winter, the sound she'd blamed on loneliness. What are you saying? She asked. The fence keep him from crossing. Until he choose peace, the man said. You break it, you call him back. Before she could respond, another voice shouted from behind the trees. Two younger Apaches emerged, carrying something wrapped in animal hide. They laid it before the warrior and stepped back. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was her husband's rifle, the one missing from her cabin. Evelyn's throat tightened. The warrior set it gently on the ground between them. He not want it in your house. Not until truth found. What truth? She whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, How he die? Not like you think. The drum started again, slow and steady. The others began chanting once more, their voices rising with the wind. The warrior turned and walked back to the circle, leaving Evelyn staring at the rifle lying at her feet, her reflection trembling in the metal barrel. The fence wasn't to keep them out. It was to keep something else in. Evelyn spent the next 2 days inside the fence, her nerves drawn tight as wire. Every creak of the timbers, every gust of wind made her flinch. She couldn't forget the Apache warrior's words, not how he died. The sentence gnawed at her, hollowing her from the inside. Her husband, Matthew Hart, had been shot by raiders 2 winters ago, or so everyone said. She'd buried him herself under the old cottonwood near the creek. No one questioned it, not even her. Until now, that evening, she took the rifle the warrior had returned and set it on the table. Its barrel gleamed dully in the lamplight. She ran her fingers over the stock and froze. Beneath the grime and scratches, she saw it, a carved symbol, a circle crossed with lines. The same mark burned into the posts of the Apache fence. Her heart pounded. What in God's name? The mark wasn't there before. She was sure of it. That night, she dreamed. The wind howled through the canyon, and a whisper called her name, Evelyn. She saw the fence glowing faintly in the moonlight, the symbols pulsing like embers. Beyond it, a shadow moved, dragging chains that sank into the earth. When she woke, the air inside the cabin was ice cold. The fire had died, and faint footprints, bare, muddy, led from the door to the corner where Matthew's boots sat. She stared at them, her mouth dry. The prints stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. Evelyn backed away until she hit the wall. No, she whispered. You're gone. You're gone. But outside, the faint rhythm of a drum began again, slow, patient, like a heartbeat beneath the ground. She stepped outside, clutching her lantern. The moon was full, washing the world in silver. The fence glowed faintly, its feathers trembling though the air was still. Then she saw him, the Apache warrior, standing just beyond the fence line, watching her silently. She raised her lantern higher. You said he's not at peace, she called. What do you mean? What truth? He didn't move at first. Then he stepped closer until his face was caught in the pale light. The one who killed your husband still walk free, he said. Your land keep his secret. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You think I don't know who killed him? Raiders took everything from us. The warrior shook his head. Not raiders. Not strangers. Her voice trembled. You're lying. He turned his gaze toward the ground beneath her cabin. You hear him calling. You feel him near. That is why fence built. The ground below not quiet. Evelyn swallowed hard. "What's under there?" He raised his staff and pointed toward the small cellar door at the side of her cabin. He'd buried wrong. "Not by your hand alone." Evelyn turned to look at it, the cellar she hadn't opened in months. The door hung crooked, half buried by dust and time. When she turned back, the warrior was gone. The next morning, she found the courage to open it. The air that rose from below was damp, stale, and cold. She lit a lantern and descended the wooden steps slowly. Her supplies still lined the shelves: sacks of grain, jars of beans, a few bottles of whiskey. But something else caught her eye: a patch of dirt near the far wall that looked recently disturbed. The earth was darker there, slightly raised. Her pulse quickened. She dropped to her knees and brushed the dirt aside with her hands. Then her fingers struck wood. A small wooden box lay buried just beneath the surface. She pulled it free, brushing the soil from its lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in her husband's rough handwriting. But one lay on top, sealed in wax with a mark she'd never seen before. The same circle and cross symbol. Her hand shook as she broke the seal. The letter inside was short: "Evelyn, if you find this, don't trust anyone who claims to guard you. The fence is not for them. It's for what I tried to hide. Forgive me." A drop of cold sweat rolled down her neck. The sound of the wind above changed, growing low and rhythmic again, almost like a chant. She stuffed the letter into her coat and climbed back up the steps, slamming the cellar door shut. Outside, a group of crows circled overhead, their cries sharp and chaotic. The fence seemed taller now, the shadows between its poles darker. Evelyn stared out at the valley. The Apaches were nowhere in sight. The land was silent except for the faint thump of that unseen drum echoing across the hills. Whatever Matthew had done, whatever he'd buried, the fence wasn't to keep spirits out, it was to keep his secret from being unearthed, and Evelyn realized, with a cold clarity, that she'd just begun to dig it up. The next sunrise bled red across the horizon, painting the sky like a wound. Evelyn Hart hadn't slept. Her husband's letter lay on the table, its words seared into her thoughts. The fence is not for them. It's for what I tried to hide. What had he hidden? What could possibly make the Apaches build a sacred fence around her home? The air inside the cabin felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She poured herself black coffee with shaking hands and stepped outside. The fence shimmered faintly in the morning light, the symbols carved into it glowing with dew. Beyond it, she saw no sign of the Apache warrior. But she felt him somewhere near. Like a shadow she couldn't see. Evelyn walked toward the cottonwood tree where her husband was buried. The grave was simple: a mound of earth, a wooden cross. But now, as she looked closer, she saw the same circle and cross symbol burned into the wood. Her breath caught. "Matthew," she whispered. The earth around the grave looked slightly uneven, disturbed, as though something beneath had shifted. She knelt, brushing her fingers along the dirt. It was colder than it should have been. Too cold. Then came the voice, soft, deep, carried on the wind. "Evelyn." She froze, every hair on her arms rising. The voice was unmistakable. Matthew's. Her lips trembled. "No," she breathed. "You're gone." The voice came again, closer this time, echoing through the still air. "You shouldn't have opened it." Evelyn scrambled backward, her boots slipping in the soil. "Who's there?" But there was no one. Only the low moan of the wind and the distant caw of crows. The air smelled of rain and something else. Something like rot. Then, in the distance, a figure appeared. The Apache warrior. He walked toward her with measured steps, bare chest gleaming in the sun, long black hair rippling in the breeze. Around his neck, turquoise and bone caught the light like shards of the earth. You opened what was meant to stay closed, he said when he reached the fence. Evelyn rose, defiant despite her shaking voice. You knew about this, didn't you? My husband is grave, it's not right. The warrior nodded solemnly. He buried what should never be buried. The fence keeps it sleeping. What it? She demanded. He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, The land remembers blood. His hands took more than food from it. He found something below the creek, an old stone, older than our people. He broke it open, freed what sleeps beneath. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. That's nonsense. The warrior stepped closer, his tone unwavering. He thought it was gold. It was not. It was a heart of the mountain agate. He broke it, and the dark took him. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Then why? Why does his voice call my name? The warrior's expression turned grim. Because you loved him. The dark uses love to return. A cold wind swept through the fence, making the feathers dance like restless souls. Evelyn turned toward the cabin, her eyes wide. If what you're saying is true, then how do I stop it? You don't, he said. But you can contain it. He reached into a pouch tied to his belt and pulled out a small charm woven from leather and turquoise, with a drop of crimson stone at its center. You wear this. When the earth trembles, when you hear his voice again, you light fire and speak no word. The fence will hold if your heart does not break. She stared at the charm, hesitant. And if it does? He looked at her sadly. Then the earth will open, and he will come. Before she could ask another question, he turned and walked away toward the hills, vanishing behind the trees. Evelyn clutched the charm tightly. The weight of it felt real, alive, pulsing faintly in her palm. That night, the storm came. The wind howled like an animal, slamming against the cabin. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rumbled through the valley. Evelyn sat by the fire, clutching the charm, her lantern flickering. Then came the whisper again, her husband's voice clearer now. You don't understand. I had to do it. It was for us. She pressed her hands to her ears, tears spilling down her cheeks. Leave me alone. The fire dimmed. The floorboards creaked out, and then beneath her feet a faint vibration. The ground trembled, just once. Evelyn froze, clutching the charm against her chest. Outside, the fence rattled violently. Feathers tearing loose into the wind. The earth wasn't done with Matthew Hart. It was calling him back. The storm did not pass quickly. It tore across the valley with a fury that felt almost personal. The rain fell in sheets, and thunder rolled over the hills like a warning drum. Inside her small cabin, Evelyn Hart kept the fire alive with trembling hands, every crack of lightning flashing across her pale face. The charm the Apache warrior had given her hung around her neck, glowing faintly red in the firelight. She could feel its pulse, a heartbeat not her own. Each time the thunder rolled, the ground shuddered. The sound wasn't just above her. It was beneath her, deep in the earth. And then came the voice again. Evelyn? This time, it wasn't in her head. It was outside. She stood, lantern shaking in her hand. Matthew? The wind howled harder, pushing against the cabin walls. The voice came again, closer, dragging through the rain like breath through water. Let me in. Her heart slammed in her chest. Slowly, she turned toward the door. Its latch rattled once, then twice. Matthew's dead, she whispered. You're not him. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then, a low groan from the earth itself. The floorboards shifted, dust falling from the rafters. Evelyn stumbled back, eyes wide as the ground under her table began to crack. Thin lines snaked across the floor like black veins. From beneath came a sound she'd never forget, a hollow knocking, as if someone were striking wood from below. No. She breathed. No. She grabbed the charm, pressing it hard against her chest. "The fire," she muttered, remembering the warrior's words. "Keep the fire." She threw another log onto the flames. The moment she did, the knocking stopped. The charm burned against her skin, not painfully, but fiercely, like it was fighting something. Then she heard horses. Evelyn rushed to the window. Through the rain, she saw torches, 4, maybe 5, flickering near the ridge. The Apache warriors had returned. At their front rode the man with the long black hair and the painted chest, rain glistening across his muscular frame. He dismounted before the fence and shouted something in his native tongue. The wind carried it like thunder. The others began to chant, raising their torches high. Evelyn burst through her door and ran toward the fence, soaked and breathless. "What's happening?" she yelled through the storm. "It's coming from beneath the cabin." The warrior met her eyes, his expression grave. "The gate opens. The storm wakes it faster than we thought. What is it?" She shouted back. He took a step closer, his voice low but urgent. "The dark spirit of the earth, bound long ago under your land. Your husband broke its stone. It claimed his soul. Now it calls your name to be free." Evelyn's knees went weak. "He didn't know." "No one ever does," the warrior said. "But love is how it climbs back. It uses his voice because your heart listens." The earth trembled again. The fence rattled, feathers tearing away into the wind. "What do I do?" she cried. The warrior drew a circle in the mud with his hand and placed a bone token in the center. "You stay inside the fence. Do not speak when it calls again. If you answer, it will wear your face next." The others threw more wood into the torches, flames rising high against the storm. They began chanting louder, their words lost in the wind but their rhythm steady, ancient and fierce. Evelyn ran back to her cabin. The floor was still cracked, but the fire burned bright. She sat near it, clutching the charm, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. Then, from outside, a whisper so gentle it made her heart ache. "Evelyn, please. It's cold." Her breath hitched. "Don't listen," she whispered to herself. "Don't listen." The voice came again, breaking with sorrow. "You left me, Evie. You promised you'd wait for me." Tears streamed down her face. The tone, the words, they were his. The same voice that used to whisper to her under starlight. "Evie." The fire flickered. She gritted her teeth and pressed the charm tighter. "You're not him," she said, her voice cracking. "He's gone." The wind screamed. The cabin shook. Then, with a deafening roar, a burst of light flared through the fence, fire and smoke twisting in the air like a living thing. Evelyn fell to her knees, clutching her chest as the charm burned bright red. The storm howled, then fell silent, completely silent. When she dared to look up, the air was still. The rain had stopped. The ground had closed. She stumbled to the window. The Apaches were gone. Only one torch remained burning by the fence, planted upright in the mud. And beside it, something small lay half buried. She stepped outside cautiously and picked it up. It was a fragment of black stone, smooth, cold, and pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, the same kind Matthew had found near the creek. Evelyn looked up toward the ridge, the echo of the warrior's chant still humming in her ears. The storm had ended. But she knew the night wasn't done. Whatever was buried under her cabin was awake now, and it remembered her name. The storm broke over the canyon like the roar of an angry god. Lightning clawed the heavens, painting the mountains in ghostly blue light. Evelyn Hart stood barefoot in the mud, rain drenching her hair and dress, staring at the blazing fire that the Apaches had built within the fence. The air trembled with drumbeats, slow, deliberate, echoing through her bones. The muscular, shirtless Apache warrior, the one who had haunted her nights and tested her courage, stood before her now. his long black hair plastered to his shoulders, tribal jewelry glistening with rain. His name, she'd finally learned, was Tazhi, meaning Thunderhawk. His gaze was fierce but not cruel. Between them lay something unspoken, a fragile thread woven by fear, defiance, and a strange kind of reverence. "What is this fence?" she cried through the storm. "What curse have you laid around my home?" Tazhi's deep voice rolled like the thunder itself. "Not a curse. A boundary. A warning to those who bring death to sacred land. You crossed where no white soul was meant to tread." Evelyn's hand tightened on her rifle. "This land was empty. I built here because I had nowhere else." He stepped closer, rain rolling down the ridges of his muscular chest. "Nothing here is empty. The bones beneath your feet are older than your people's dreams." He motioned toward the fire where symbols were burning in the flames, ancient. Patterns of circles and birds. The storm howled as Evelyn lowered her rifle. "Then why show yourself now? Why fence me in like an animal?" Tazhi's eyes softened with something unexpected, sorrow. "Because the fence was not meant to trap you, but to protect you." She blinked. "Protect me? From what?" He glanced toward the dark ridge beyond her cabin. Lightning flashed, and in its light, Evelyn saw figures moving, cloaked men on horseback, armed, circling like wolves. Her heart stopped. The men from the mining company. The ones who wanted her land, the ones who had killed her husband 2 winters ago. "They come for you tonight," Tazhi said, stepping closer, his voice low and urgent. "They come to take the canyon, to burn your home, to erase what they cannot own." Evelyn's throat tightened. "How do you know this?" "Because they came before," he said grimly, "and the earth remembers their footsteps." The wind roared. Evelyn's cabin door slammed open and shut behind her. She could see shadows of the riders descending the ridge. Fear surged through her veins, but so did anger, cold and righteous. "Then help me stop them," she said. Tazhi single quotes as expression hardened. "This is not my war." "Yes, it is," Evelyn snapped. "You said this land is sacred, then protect it. Protect what's left." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The rain slowed, and the thunder rolled away into the hills. Then, slowly, Tazhi extended his hand. Across his palm was a scar, shaped like lightning. "Swear to honor what you defend," he said, "and I will fight beside you." Evelyn hesitated, then took his hand. "I swear." A sudden stillness fell. The drums stopped. From the shadows beyond the fence, more Apache warriors emerged, faces painted, weapons gleaming. They stood behind Tazhi, silent and watchful, their presence like living storm clouds. When the riders reached the fence, they laughed, thinking it would be easy prey. But as they tried to break through, the wind howled and the earth seemed to move. Shaking the fence posts like the land itself was alive, Evelyn raised her rifle, Tazhi drew his blade. And together they stood in the firelight, 2 souls bound by oath and thunder. The first rider fired a shot. Evelyn returned it. A man fell from his horse, his scream drowned by the storm. Then chaos erupted, gunfire, shouting, and the war cries of the Apaches echoing into the night. When the thunder cracked again, Evelyn saw Tazhi in motion, swift, precise, his blade flashing through rain and lightning. Every movement was poetry, every strike justice carved by centuries of loss. By dawn, the ridge was silent again. Smoke rose from the fires. The fence still stood, unbroken, glistening with rain and blood. Evelyn fell to her knees, trembling. Tazhi stood over her, chest heaving, blood streaking his shoulder. He looked at her, not as enemy, not as trespasser, but as something else entirely. "You fought with the spirit of the hawk," he said softly. "The land accepts you now." Evelyn looked up, tears mingling with rain. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do now?" He turned toward the horizon. "The storm is not over. But tonight you are no longer alone." And as the dawn broke over the canyon, the fence glowed faintly in the morning light, no longer a barrier, but a bond. The morning sun rose through a shroud of smoke and golden mist, casting a soft glow over the canyon that had nearly turned into a graveyard. Evelyn Hart stood beside her cabin, her rifle dangling loosely from her hand. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled with rain and ash, yet her eyes burned bright, alive. The storm had passed, but its echo still trembled in her heart. The fence that had once caged her now shimmered in the dawn. Feathers swayed gently from the posts, their tips stained with rain and blood. She touched one, soft, fragile, and whispered a silent prayer. The land was still. The silence after chaos was almost sacred. From the trees, the Apache warriors emerged quiet, proud, and solemn. Their faces were painted with ashes, their weapons lowered. Among them, Tazhi, the muscular, shirtless Apache warrior whose strength had carried her through the night, walked toward her. His long black hair glistened with water, tribal jewelry catching the sun in blue and silver sparks. He stopped in front of her. For the first time, he didn't look like a ghost from the old world. He looked human, weary, and real. "It is done," he said softly. "The men who came for you will not return." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. "I didn't want bloodshed, but they left me no choice." Tazhi's gaze drifted toward the ridge where the enemy lay buried in shadow. "The land chooses who must bleed," he murmured. "Last night it chose to remember you." She frowned gently. "Remember me?" He reached into the pouch hanging from his belt and withdrew a small carved feather made of bone, the same kind that hung from the fence. He placed it in her palm, his calloused fingers brushing hers. "The fence is not a prison," he said. "It is a circle, a promise between you and this land. The spirits will guard it now, as long as you honor it." Evelyn looked at the feather, feeling its strange warmth against her skin. "And if I don't?" His eyes darkened. "Then the fence will close again, and no light will pass through." A gust of wind swept through the clearing, stirring the ashes and feathers. For a moment, she thought she heard whispers in the air, voices like wind through reeds. The canyon itself seemed alive, breathing around her. The other warriors began to fade back into the trees, their shadows merging with the mist. But Tazhi stayed. He looked toward the horizon where sunlight spilled across the mesas, and for the first time, Evelyn saw something like peace in his face. "You could stay," she said suddenly. The words escaped before she could stop them. "You could stay here. We could. Rebuild together." He smiled faintly, not mocking, but sorrowful. "The hawk cannot live in the walls he guards. My path follows the storm." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then what happens to me?" Tazhi's gaze softened. "You live," he said simply. "You plant again. You mend what was broken. And when you walk beyond the fence, walk with respect. That is all the land ever asked of you." She nodded, but tears welled in her eyes. "Will I ever see you again?" He took her hand once more and pressed it over her heart. "You will not need to. The land will remember for you." Then, without another word, he turned and began to walk toward the canyon's edge. The rising sun lit his back, turning his skin bronze and gold. His hair, long and black, streamed behind him like the shadow of a hawk taking flight. Evelyn watched until he disappeared into the shimmering horizon, part of the land, part of the legend. The wind rose again, carrying the scent of cedar and smoke. She looked at the fence one last time. Where the posts met, the feathers had begun to glow faintly in the morning light, not with fire, but with life. The circle was complete. That night, Evelyn sat by her cabin fire, the carved feather resting beside her. Outside, the canyon was quiet, the air calm and forgiving. When she closed her eyes, she could almost hear the steady beat of a drum, faint, distant, like thunder that never really left. And she smiled through her tears. Because now she understood. The fence was never meant to keep her in. It was meant to keep her heart open, to remind her that even in the wildest lands, some fences were built not of wood, but of faith, respect, and remembrance. As the fire dimmed and the stars stretched wide above her, Evelyn whispered into the dark, "Ride with the storm, Tazhi." A single feather drifted from the rafters to the floor beside her. And far away, over the mountains, thunder rolled once more, soft, distant, like a promise kept.